this country is at war with Germany.
We shall go on to the end.
I remember the sheets of flame which came up and almost blinded us from our guns.
Hello and welcome to the World War II podcast. I'm Angus Wallace. While at We Have Wares Fest last year, I caught Paul Woodadge, the host of World War II TV on YouTube, giving an excellent talk on D-Day tourism. So I thought I would ask him onto the show to discuss tourism and how that has changed and what to see. Paul is based in France and for the last 20 years has been a battlefield tour guide. More recently, he launched World War II TV and became a Second World War YouTube sensation. Thanks for joining me. Paul, I'm sure the question that everyone wonders is, how on earth do you become a battlefield tour guide?
Well, it's different to when I started than how it works now. I moved to Normandy 23 years ago this September. And at that time, there weren't really any dedicated World War II tour guides in Normandy. There were generalists, mostly French, one Brit, who did D-Day, cathedrals, trips to Paris, Versailles, Monet's Garden, all that kind of stuff. And I had thought when I moved here that I might get a job in a museum. And my French wasn't good enough then to do that. And I was a bit floundering because I'd kind of made this big decision to just move. I didn't really know what I was going to do, which the 54-year-old me looks at 32-year-old me and thinks, what the hell were you doing? But 32-year-old me was a different me. And long story short, I made connection with a guy who was just starting a touring company where he was going to do a bit of everything, Mont Saint-Michel, D-Day stuff, French guy. And he found out that I was an ex-reenactor, World War II buff, blah, 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 blah. And he thought, oh, brilliant, this is great. And just kind of gave me a job. That's it. No training, no nothing, no farting about any kind of official paperwork. Suddenly there I am. As long as I had a driving license so I could drive a van, boom. Since then, everything's changed. Now there are transport regulations in Normandy where anybody taking a paying member of public on a tour in a vehicle they're driving has to have either an individual transport license or be on a company transport license. That didn't exist back then. So it's much harder now. And then there's another thing. There's a French exam, the Guide Conférencier, which is a standard exam for doing any period. You can do Roman stuff right up to World War II. And most guides these days come out of university with this qualification. So becoming a guide now is a lot harder than it was when I started it. I was very lucky to do it back then. And it sounds crazy to think there were no dedicated World War II guiding company individuals in Normandy. There were companies like Ledger existed back then. There's always been these big, and the Holtz tours, bringing people over from the UK. But as for being based in Normandy, it wasn't really a thing. And now, as we're now facing the 80th anniversary this year, it'll be about 150 tour guides in Normandy. That's how many are based here all year round doing this as pretty much the full-time job, not counting all the dozens and dozens who come week in, week out from America and Britain and stuff. So in 20 years, it's gone from 2 or 3 people to 150 plus.
What I find odd about that is war tourism has a really long history. So they're writing tourist books about the First World War as the war's still happening, which is just remarkable. And you can find those on archive.org. They're absolutely incredible. So that Normandy tourism, if it really gets its boost, I guess, post 2000, do we know how much tourism there was sort of straight after the war and running in through the 60s and 70s? Was it a thing?
Oh, there's always been some. Yeah, there's always been some. And I kind of did a little presentation on this last year at We Have Ways, and this is all my interpretation. I don't have the data to back it up as such. But the first tourism was servicemen who were still in Europe in 45, 46, 47, because there's still, as you know, a large military presence there. And they've got like weekends off, and they're thinking, hang on, either where was I 3 years ago, or where was the unit that I'm part of? Some, young GI in the 1st Division from US on occupation duties. What did my sergeant, who I know now, what did he do in June 44? So they'll go off to Normandy. So you see photos of guys in uniforms in Normandy in 46, 47. And the French were going around just out of curiosity because there was stuff lying around. There were Panther tanks in fields and stuff like that still just after war. And then you start getting the next phase is kind of people making a deliberate, conscious effort, families to go back and follow where they were. So Fred from the DLI comes over, or Jim from the 29th Division comes over, and very, very specific looking at where they were. And then it kind of gradually moves on and on through the sort of 60s and 70s. And the peak era was the Stephen Ambrose, Saving Private Ryan, Band of Brothers, sort of 25 years, starting kind of early 80s going up to 2000, which is coinciding with when I arrived here. And back then, I mean, I can remember it so clearly. Every single middle-aged American guy, their reference was Stephen Ambrose. That was it. They never anything else. It was Stephen Ambrose. And Brits, maybe Max Hastings, John Keegan. And then what we're in now, and I'm doing a very brief version of this trend, is what I call obligation tourism. And it sounds negative, but it isn't really. It's that Normandy is, I think, the only battlefield, World War II. I think Gallipoli might kind of come into it a bit. First of all, Somme maybe, where people do it because how can you not do it if you're in that area? So if you're an American in Chicago, for example, and you say to your friends, hey, I'm going to France for 2 weeks next year. Are you doing the D-Day beaches? And if you say, no, I wasn't thinking of doing that actually, because I'd rather go and see cathedrals. You've got to go to the D-Day beaches. You've got to go and pay your respects. That's what I mean by obligation. And there's an element of Brits doing the same thing. Especially I came back on the ferry Friday morning. All these Brits who are going off somewhere else. They're either going off skiing, because you can tell by the skis on top of the cars, or they're going off somewhere else hot but they're going through Normandy. So they're going to have to stop, whether they want to or not, because we're going like 5 minutes away from Pegasus Bridge. We better stop there. Now, some of them genuinely want to go and see Pegasus Bridge because of the longest day, because of this. But I think maybe 70 or 80% of all the tourists who come to Normandy now are doing it because if you go to Paris, you've got to see the Eiffel Tower. If you go to Italy, you've got to go to Venice, that kind of thing. And I think that's where Normandy is unique. More than half the people who pay the bills of my friends who are out touring every day, they're doing it because they're ticking it off a list. They're interested for that day they're spending. They're not like us. They don't want to get into the details of, so where was the 3rd Division on July the 11th and who was on their support and where was the Agra behind that? And that's not where they are.
That's interesting because it's that you look at Gallipoli and it's a moment in time that almost galvanizes a nation to create an Australian identity. You mentioned the Somme. In many respects, the Somme is the British idea of the First World War. It's the first of the mass armies. It's not conscript, but it is a mass volunteer army. But actually, it's interesting because D-Day is not necessarily that for us, but I guess it is for Americans. It is that first time en masse they are seeing combat, which then poses the question, if that's that for the Americans, what is it for us? Surely we should all be visiting Alamein. The big turning point in the war, our big victory. Why are we not going to Alamein yet?
Probably, yeah. A little bit further, though, yeah. I suppose our thing is Battle of Britain. We had Battle of Britain Day pretty shortly after the battle, didn't we, every year? So I think that's maybe our...
But that I'm not sure that gets forgotten. If I said to people, it was my wedding anniversary, Battle of Britain Day. If I said to people, my wedding anniversary, Battle of Britain Day, they'll all go, what's that then? That's
true. I mean, the other thing that's important to discuss while we're having this conversation, I think, is the distinction between D-Day and the Battle of Normandy, because... And the two are very different. I mean, obviously one is an extension of the other, but the great majority of people who come here, it's D-Day. They want D-Day. I've thought about this a lot. It's because D-Day wraps up quite nicely if you just leave it at D-Day. And it's like the Germans held the beaches and now we held the beaches. Tick. It's not even like El Alamein. I mean, there's 3 or 4 different versions of El Alamein, and it's like, well, hang on, does that one become that one? And one of the things I always find difficult to explain is something like Operation Epsom in Normandy, because I can see when it starts, but when does it stop? When does Epsom actually come to end and become the Battle of the Odon or the Orne? When does it morph into Hill 112? Is there a precise minute? It's like the Luftwaffe. The Battle of Britain is precise for us as the Brits, but the Germans, it morphs into a bombing campaign. So I think D-Day is a nice thing for people to come. And it has a convenient resolution because most of the tours end up finishing at, if you're an American, the American cemetery, or if you're a Brit or Canadian, at a British or Canadian cemetery. And that's it. You can kind of tie up the parcel, put it in your your metaphorical travel cupboard and say, I've done D-Day now. And that's what I spent my life doing.
We won. We held the beaches. We don't have to do any more. After that, we just won the war.
Well, you see, you're laughing, but that's kind of what some people think. You know, you'll get that. So I do much less guiding now because I'm doing YouTubing and stuff. But you'll get that where you're dropping them at their hotel or dropping them at their station, and they will just kind of throw in this comment there. So what happened after D-Day then? Because V-Day was eaten. Well, I go, well, how long have you got? Because, I mean, we could spend another few days just doing Normandy. Then there's Market Garden, and there's what's happening in Italy, and there's the broad front strategy, and there's a strategic bombing. And then they look at you like, oh, no, I didn't mean. They were saying, how are you? For you to say, fine, thanks, not how are you? For you to go through all your ailments. And I think that's what happens with the Battle of Normandy. You've realized, and you've gone beyond where their interest is. And so that's why I said at the beginning of this, I don't want to appear negative about what I call obligation tourism, because they're putting lots of money into the Normandy community. They're buying books. They're paying for museum entries. They're paying tour guides, but their interest is, it's like the people who watch the Grand National once a year, but don't go to racing. There's nothing wrong with that. You know, that's fine. The people who watch Wimbledon, but don't watch any other tennis.
Well, how much then do you find yourself wrestling with the popular history of D-Day and how that has actually shaped the cultural memory of the war to actually compared to how you understand D-Day and you can see it being played out, which is a different thing. It
is a different thing, and it's why, you know, I use the metaphor of a hat a lot, because I wear a hat a lot, and I talk about having an analytical hat on and an emotional hat on, for example. So that if you're on a battlefield tour, there's moments when you're analysing the Allied plan to bomb the beaches. That's your analytical moment. But then there's that moment when you're talking about, you know, two twins who landed and one died, the other one survived, and you're reading a poem of the survivor. And that's an emotional moment. And I think my job as a battlefield guide is totally different to my job as a YouTuber creator of history, because the market, the consumer is entirely different. There is, of course, an overlap, but it's very different. So you have to pitch it at, what are they coming here with? What do they want out of this? How much about this stuff they really know? And you kind of work with what they come into. And the popular memory thing is very interesting, because you have to give them the greatest hits they want on a tour, because that's what their frame of reference is. Because if you don't, they won't book with you. So everyone has to point out, if you're in the American sector, John Steele, the parachute effigy on the church. Even though I personally don't think that ever happened. I don't think he did land on the church. I think he kind of made most of it up. But how can you possibly go there and not point it out? Because everybody else is looking at it. You're standing there with everybody else taking photos of it. So if you just say to your customers, yeah, well, I don't think that happened, they go, but. So I won't take anybody to Pegasus Bridge unless I can also include Ronville and the high ground. That's kind of a personal rule, because you can't just go straight to the cake. You've got to have soup first. I'm mixing my analogies all over the place and metaphors today, but and people's popular memory, as you know, doing what you do, people's ideas are generally absolutely carved in stone, and you're not going to switch them over to something else in a few hours or a few minutes. That they will come here thinking whatever it is they think about Normandy. They'll think that the general pattern was the greatest thing since sliced bread, whatever it be, and nothing you're going to say, no matter how many qualifications you throw at them or how many books you've read or you've done, they're going to stick with whatever it is they think. So you just got to work with it. You just got to work with what people's expectations are and what they think they know about the battle. But I actually now prefer, as we're moving into an era, people don't come armed with all the Stephen Ambrose back catalogue, so to speak. Oh, really? I thought we'd be still solidly in that. No, it's just end. People don't mention Stephen Ambrose at all now. It's like he has fallen further from the pedestal he was on. He's just not fallen off it. He's plummeted down a sinkhole. It's correct. No one mentions him at all. They mentioned Band of Brothers, but they've forgotten that was Stephen Ambrose. They forget. Yeah. So we've moved on from the literary, and it's all stoically based on film and TV. Is the idea of the history of the war of that day, the events that day. So Stephen Ambrose doesn't come into it at all now. So often what they come in is that they don't have any frame of reference at all. They may have seen a documentary, which is good because they're starting as a blank canvas. The worst is when people come armed with loads of stuff they learned in the 1970s that's wrong. And for movies, I mean, the Patton movie single-handedly did the most damage, I think, about how the perceptions of leadership, certainly. And I love the Patton movie. But that's pretty much sealed what Americans think about Montgomery, for example. I mean, I think for the Brits, Battle of Britain sealed our vision of the Battle of Britain in that kind of slightly posh people leaping in and out of cockpits. You know, Edward Fox and Christopher Plummer and what have you. And I know there is a couple of Cockneys in it, but they're kind of Ian McShane, I suppose, is a kind of a false Cockney in it. But so the popular memory thing is really interesting. I remember back in the day when it was the Stephen Ambrose days, and this is going to sound incredibly sexist, I don't mean it to, but the guy would be the history buff, and she would say at the beginning, "Oh, I'm just here for Jim. This is Jim's day." And within a few minutes, he's saying to me what he knows about it, most of which is wrong, you know, because it's from movies. And then you're starting to correct him. And then by lunchtime, he's all confused now because everything he thought he knew, I've told him it's bollocks. But the wife or the friend who's traveling with them who doesn't know, they're further ahead on the day because they're not having to erase what they think they know. They're taking on what I say and what the museums are saying. And they're now ahead. Now, by the afternoon, they're the ones leading the conversation. And the guy who thought he knew it is looking all bewildered. I was on Omaha Beach once, WN60, second day of a tour. And this guy, you know, a typical, the Stephen Ambrose generation, read all the books, blah, blah, blah. And I try and not reveal how many people were killed on Omaha Beach to as late as I can in the day, because I think it doesn't really matter for the storytelling of how the victory was achieved, how they broke up the jaws. I try to leave it, because basically, it's not as many people as people think. That's where I'm going with this. And this guy kept pestering me and saying, "So how many people died in Omaha Beach then? It's thousands and thousands, isn't it?" And I went, "I'd rather leave that to later." And he kept on badgering. I said, "Okay, it's about 950 died in Omaha Beach, ish, plus a few thousand wounded." And he just lost it. He said, I remember him saying, "I've taken a lot of your tall tales these last day and a half, but this is absolute rubbish. Everyone knows it was thousands," he said. Everyone knows it was thousands. I said, "Well, we're getting into the distinction between casualty and fatality. But yes, it was thousands of casualties, but it was less than 1,000 fatalities, although with recent research, we may have nudged it just over 1,000 now, but it's still not thousands." And he's losing it now. He's kind of, there's nothing near him to throw around, but if there were things to throw around, he'd be, sweeping books off and monitors off desktops and stuff. He's really quite vexed now. And he's like, "I've had enough of you. You bloody limey. You know nothing of it." Blah, 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 blah. And I said, "Well, I don't know what to say, because what I'm telling you is accepted fact." I said, "If you don't believe me, who would you believe?" I said, "I don't know." So I'm looking at my phone, and I happen to see on Facebook that Joe Balkowski's online, who wrote Omaha Beach and Beyond the Beach at about 29 Division, the official story of the 29 Division. And I saw he was online. I said, "Joe, how many people died on Omaha Beach?" And he messaged back immediately. Thank God he messaged back straight away. He said, "You know this, Woody." I said, "I know it. I need someone else. I need you to say." It's not about 900 and 930 or something. And I said to the guy, "Here is the official 29 Division historian who wrote the official book on Omaha Beach, who lectures on this every year. He's telling you, he's confirming what I said. It's less than 1,000. Interestingly, the guy broke and crumbled and apologized immediately. He didn't double down. He didn't try and, he caved completely and went, "Well, why do I think it's thousands?" And now that, I said, is an interesting question. That's where we're stuck with a sort of Saving Private Ryan image and video games of slaughter. And as you know, as podcasting, the language we use. Why do we use slightly different language with Omaha than we do the other bridges? Why do we use bloody Omaha and that kind of thing? Because if you look at the contemporary reporting written just after the invasion, in the newspapers at the time, and even what was being released officially by the military, they didn't really make a distinction between the 5 landing beaches in terms of the outcome. The idea that Omaha was worst is a much later post-war construction.
Obviously, this always falls back into the idea of, if you got the First World War, we're obsessed with the Somme because of vast casualties, irrespective that there's some wonderful victories elsewhere, but we don't necessarily want to look at that. We like to look at things that we can almost perceive as being problematic or, to use the word disaster might not be, it's probably more term, but it makes it almost easier to view those perhaps for people visiting as a sort of a pilgrimage. It's a pilgrimage and if it's a pilgrimage, it's got sort of religious connotations of which which makes it more difficult to question. They've become fixed in the cultural memory. It's interesting, and as you say, it has been bloody Omaha.
Yeah.
You don't get bloody Sword Beach or Gold.
But the thing is, as we know with all what you do and I do, is that most battles ended up going quite well. Okay, you win some, you lose some. That's not the way we like our history package. We need everything to be a turning point or a milestone or the greatest or the smallest or the furthest inland, the biggest number of paratroopers, whatever it would be. And that's how we like to frame things. And we're guilty of that ourselves. I walk around a museum and I'm drawn to exciting language above an exhibit than I am. Here are some things that are vaguely interesting. You don't, but most battles I would maintain are interesting on some level without being earth-shattering. So that it's the turning point aspect. All battles can't be turning points, and there. I don't think World War II or World War I was ever an event turned it 180 and suddenly the Allies are winning after not winning. It's suddenly like a striker getting 3 goals in an FA Cup final. Suddenly, that's not how wars are. Wars are gradual chipping away.
So in which case, does it make it really difficult to try and get into the weeds with people because they're just looking for the big event rather than going, this little thing is really interesting, and they go, yeah, but look at the cliffs at Port Dock. Yeah, but look at, can you get into the weeds when you get showing people around, or could you? And has that changed over time?
That situation has already been determined by how long they have decided to spend with you. Right, you already know. So virtually the only tours I do now, I do a week-long tour in April of Normandy and a week-long tour in October. So people are committing to a week being with me. They're clearly interested. That's 7 or 8 days in a hotel, 7 or 8 days with me, blah blah blah. So at that level, they are interested in the individual commandos on the beaches and which one is going in which direction. They are interested in the minutiae of the push inland and the operations and Goodwood and Cobra and things like that. That's why they're there. My partner Mag, the 3 inquiries she got this morning were for half-day tours, so 4 or 5 hours starting in Bayeux to see the American beaches. If she takes them on, that will determine exactly what she can possibly achieve with them, and also what they want. They won't want to get into the weeds of how does Operation Overlord sit into a broad increase in success of amphibious landings going back to kind of Dieppe and Torch and commando landings, and how does this fitting in with the 2nd Tactical Air Force and the 9th Air Force and 8th Air Force's bringing of the war to... They don't want that. They haven't got time for that. They want to show me where people ran up the beach and show me a bunker that had a gun in it. And that's fine. That's absolutely fine. That's what they want. I'm appearing all ranty and middle-aged and cynical again.
No, it's funny. I can't remember, one of the tour guides in the book by Geoffrey Bird has a picture of the beach. This is the bit where everyone wants to has their photograph taken running up the beach. It just sort of amused me because it's such an easy thing to sort of do, and we all think it'd be great to do. But you said actually, the process of doing that has shifted what you're doing away from tourism, away from sort of remembrance and commemoration to tourism. And that's a longevity of time.
We've got the 80th coming up this year, and even language, which words are used to describe events, divides everybody. And it gets more complicated because there aren't sometimes exact translations of words from French to English. So they could call something in English something, and then the French translation makes it sound very different. So the French will use a word animation that we use to, for cartoons and Wallace and Gromit and stuff. But an animation in French is like an event. So you can have an animation on in a town hall it's not someone with a clay model moving. It's something else. And there are the other things like spectacle is a slightly different use of the word. So people get very angry sometimes because there's like a 40s night going on. So they'll say this is a celebration of D-Day. I'm going, well, there's nothing wrong with having a 40s night to celebrate the liberation. My analogy, again, I use on this, right? and I've used it so many times. If people are listening to this and they've heard me say this on someone else's podcast or my own channel, I'm sorry. But in a church, things happen inside churches. There are weddings, there are funerals, there are, harvest festival things. There might be Sunday school things. All sorts of things happen within that space, and all of them are fine. Funerals, of course, are part of our day-to-day life. So are weddings. Normandy in June is all of those things happening in the same space at the same time. There's a church. Normandy is the church. Carry on with this metaphor. And there's remembrance. There's funerals happening at the same time as joy. You get that in places like Aramorse, where there will be a tour group stopping where a person on that tour's dad died on that beach, died on Gold Beach. And they're standing on the beach thinking about the fact, grandfather Stan died there. But at the same time, there's someone giving jive lessons in the 40s night thing. And there's a parade of military vehicles and reenactors going past with sirens going. All of those things are fine, but they're happening in the same space. And it's the tonal shift that's really weird. I look forward to the June period every year, and I dread it at the same time, because you have to, you're trying to switch your brain from all these things happening in the same space. And it's very complicated. And as I said, not individually, they're all okay. It's fine to come and people to pay respects to where their relatives fell. And it's fine to have a 40s night. Everybody let their hair down and think about the joy that the end of the war brought. Someone will always say, why are the French calling this a celebration? It's not a celebration, it's commemoration. Well, it's all of it. But there isn't a single word that describes everything that's going on. Commemoration is because that doesn't cover remembrance, does it? Technically, commemoration.
Well, and what's interesting, you can have that seemingly for the Second World War, but you don't have it for the First World War. It's all about remembrance and commemoration, which we can have celebration for the Second World War. And you think, well, what's the difference? And actually, they tried to celebrate the end of the First World War, but I think it's the Daily Mail in the early 20s put a stamp on it saying, you've got to remember the dead. And celebration becomes sort of a dirty word, and we all have to commemorate and remember. But it's odd that you can have a celebration. You have the VE Day pictures of people celebrating, and it's less about the dead. Now, I was sort of wondering if actually, have we moved on to more, you get those documentaries of people who are so removed from their family members during the First World War and the First World battlefields, moved to tears about someone they have no idea about, really. Who do you think you are? I've just found them. And they've moved by. Have we moved? Are we not quite there yet for the Second World War, where you've got people on the beaches that are so far removed that they're feeling sort of a gravitas that they don't really understand?
I think you're onto something, and I think it's to do with the fact we're still transitioning out of the people being alive who remembered it phase. I mean, there will be some veterans in Normandy this June. Not many, and they'll be very old. 98, 99 plus, 100 plus. In the 70th who said this will be the last summer veteran. The 75th who said this will be the last summer veteran. And the 80th, but this really is going to be the last one. I mean, by the 85th, you'd have to be 103 minimum. I mean, there might be some. I mean, I know Harry Patch and the first one was around, but this is the last one where they're going to have to still include the veterans as part of the commemoration stroke, whichever word we decide to use. They're part of the speeches. They're referencing the speeches. People want to meet the veterans. And I think what we're going to do let's look as far ahead as the 90th will be very, very different. And I think will it move into the way where it's all about commemoration and remembrance like with the First World War? I don't think it will. And I think it won't because of the fascination with the vehicles and the reenactors. There's look at the railway events in the UK. We have ways where it's a celebration of, you can celebrate the kit as well as realize that it's a killing machine. I mean, my feeling is when I see the Lancaster fly down the Pall Mall on the telly or something, two contradictory, but I've accepted them, thoughts happen in my head. One is the 10-year-old boy in me goes, holy crap, look at that, it's the Lancaster, isn't that just amazing? And I'm in absolute awe of it. And the other part of me is there is a weapon of war. There is a thing that brought death to tens of thousands of people. I'm not talking about whether or not Germany deserved it and strategic bombing and the cons. I'm just saying that's what my brain does when I see the Lancaster. It's the same thing when I see a Churchill tank or a Bren gun. But some people can't, they're stuck in a remembrance thing where they can't see that people can also like tanks. And some people who only like tanks don't understand that there's a remembrance aspect that has to go with it as well. Most of us, I think, are in the middle. Most of us understand it. It's all okay. It's just, again, it's compartmentalizing it. It's fine to sit and admire the engineering of a tank, but also think, hang on, but that brought death. It's okay to have that paradox, to me.
Paul, we're just going to take a short break. Folks, we'll be back in a moment. Welcome back. I'm talking to Paul Woodadge about D-Day tourism. You mentioned veterans returning. Now, my father landed at Arromanches in September 1944. And we went back in 1989, I think, with him, and we went all round everywhere. And I remember sort of looking across the beaches and said to him, "So does any of this look familiar, Dad? Is it all coming back?" He says, "No, none of it looks familiar whatsoever." And I think he then took us to some chateau where he had this story he'd been telling for 40 years about how he'd spent the night in the chateau because there was nowhere for them to stop. And we took him back and he peered over the fence and that didn't look familiar either. I wonder, actually, as the people returning have changed, has it become less of a two-way process? Because I presume when you started, you were getting veterans and actually you'd be saying less than them asking you, "Where's this?" because that was where I was? Or was there a lot of, "Where was that? I don't know," and they can't work it out either?
You'd get a bit of both. Sometimes you're filling in the gaps. Other times, like in a book, like in an oral history book, they're telling you the emotion of what it was like to run across the field. They don't know where the field was. So you're the one saying, "Well, I think this probably was the field they were," because your start line would have been over there, and the war diaries say that you were going for that church tower over there. So I think this is probably the field. They can't remember which field it was, and why would they? Why the hell would they remember geographical details when there were shells landing on them and shredding them and their friends? So you have to, they have to kind of trust you to fill in the bits they don't know. You're not going to say to them, "This must be what it felt like." You have them tell you that. But sometimes they know nothing. Sometimes they come back and it's all been blocked out. Other times, they know a lot. And sometimes I've had the situation where it's simply because they're in Normandy. It's triggering something. The actual standing in the places is connecting, and I'm asking the right questions. I remember one particular time, it's a British family. I think he was a commando, the veteran. And right at the beginning in the emails, the son said he doesn't remember very much. We know he was whatever it was, let's say number 6 commando. So just take us that general area. But we're not expecting him to remember any details of stuff. And we get in the van, and because I'm sort of saying, "So which troop were you in, and which this, that, and where did you train, and where were you heading for?" It was starting to come out. And his family were in the back of the van. They were starting to grumble a little bit about, "Why is he telling this complete stranger all this stuff? He's never told us this stuff." I kind of pulled the van over and pretended I had to get a map out of the back or something. And I just, because he was deaf as a post, that's why I put him in the front. And I said to them, "It's coming out now. Don't be jealous that he's telling me. There's 2 reasons he's telling me. One, we're here. It's triggering something. And 2, I'm a stranger. He's maybe found it difficult to say these things to you because he's talking about moments where perhaps he felt he didn't do as well as he could have done, or his friend got killed, or whatever it would be." And they go, and then the family went, "Oh yeah, we should just shut up and kind of enjoy it." I said, "Yeah, kind of." And then during the process of the day, this guy is unloading all this stuff, and it's like a therapy session as well as being a history lesson. And at the end of the day, the son or the grandson or something said, "We'll take him back and we'll get him to write all this stuff down." I got an email like 2 weeks later. He'd forgotten it all again. They went to him and said, "Can you tell us all that stuff?" He said, "Normally." Like, "What stuff?" "I don't remember now." So it was like the window, the fissure in time opened during that day, and it all came out. And then as soon as he was back out of that environment, it was obviously in his head somewhere, but it all just got locked away.
And he's talking to someone who can sort of join dots when they're not there, and it all helps draw it out.
Yeah, and knowing when to push on with questions. I mean, I've been with veterans of different nationalities, and sometimes a member of the public will go up and say, "Hello, sir, thank you very much for our freedom." And I'll say, "How many people did you kill in World War II?" And you go, "What? You don't start with that question. You never ask that question. If that comes up, you skirt around it like a very dangerous minefield, but you don't say to them, "How many people did you kill in World War II?" And this is where I think I'm bringing it back to the memory of is that maybe the person asking that question has their frame of reference is video games, maybe, where it is about don't progress through the level unless you kill a certain number of people and clear the bunker. So they're asking the person as if they were completing a level on a computer game, How many goes did you have at getting off the beach? How many times did you? I kept having to press restart. But that's not how it is. If you die on the beach going out the landing craft, that's it. That you are dead getting out the landing craft. There isn't next time I'll go left. I know I'm laughing about a tragic thing, but it's
an interesting that that's the way people are accessing history now. That is often their first way in. What I'm intrigued by is some of the sites. I mean, there'll be certain sites that people just have to visit, and they're just Arrow Marshes and the Mulberry Harbours. But I wondered, have sites changed in I don't want to use the words fashion, but have the sites that people visited, or the guides have taken people, changed over time? And I was particularly struck by how do lesser known sites become hotspots? And I found your investigation to the church at is it Angloville?
Angloville.
Yeah, interesting.
What's happened was the very famous sites have become so easy to do without a guide that the guide is now almost superfluous. So Pegasus Bridge, for example, which is probably the number one place Brits go to, you don't really need a guide there because there's information boards, there's arrows, here's where the first guide landed, here's where the second guide landed, they went over there, that's where the pillbox is, and the same things repeated in the museum. And Santa Maria Glees, Utah Beach, some of Omaha Beach, they're all a bit like that now. You don't really need a guide there. And I got an email this morning from someone who's been watching my channel saying, give me the 10 best sites to go to that are obscure in Normandy. And the thing is, it doesn't really work that, because if I send that person there on their own, it'll just be a field. It only becomes a place of significance if there's someone there with you who can explain. Well, you see, there's a hedge. I can't remember where it is, but I know it. I go past it, like inland from Gold Beach. And it's where, and I can't remember the name of the German commander. He's like a major, and he's got like 3 or 4 Panzer IVs in there or something like that. And a troop or two of British armour comes down over. And there's this fist fight. There's like tank crews clobbering each other over the head with the butts of their revolvers and stuff like that. There's nothing there to see. There's absolutely nothing there to see at all. And you could stand at any hedgerow and say it happened there, and people wouldn't be able to tell you that you're wrong. I happen to know where the hedgerow is when I'm driving down that road, but often I'm driving down that road randomly because I'm trying to, and I think, I'll stop and I'll tell. When I go past it, like the veteran being triggered, I think, I could tell that story of that guy. And when I drive down the road, the name is coming, and the farmer opposite the road, if he sees me parked there, he often comes out because he's dug up stuff in the hedgerow. He's dug up shell cases and bits and mess tin and things like that. So there's a place I could tell this guy to go there. And I mean, it's in James Holland's Normandy 44 book, the story. So I could say, look to page 127 of the book there, or whatever it would be. But it has no intrinsic interest, the location. That's what's often weird about battlefield guiding, is that I think people want to see something very visual. I think that's why they're drawn to sites. That's why they're drawn to John Steele hanging from the church tower in San Maria Glees, because they can take a photo of it. And Pegasus Bridge, it's very visual. The beaches, and that's why Omaha draws more than Sword Beach, because Sword Beach could be Brighton in some way, because it's beach huts and pebbles and a promenade and houses behind it. Could be Brighton, could be Eastbourne, could be Blackpool. Whereas Omaha has because of the crescent moon shape of the bay and the bluffs up behind it and some imposing bunkers there, it kind of has this feeling. Yet Sword has exactly the same significance and exactly the same important stories, but doesn't visually stimulate in the same way. So I haven't quite answered the question the way you answered, but it's, the inland sites, and this is why I went back to this distinction between D-Day and the Battle of Normandy. If I never have to go to D-Day sites again, I'd be quite happy in some ways. It's the Battle of Normandy that is interesting because it's muddy. And I mean that literally and figuratively. You are standing in a muddy gateway, but also outcomes in that you've got to spend time. I mean, like the Canadians battling against the 12th SS, for example, it goes kind of victory, defeat, draw, defeat, victory, draw, undetermined, victory, defeat, victory, over like several weeks. So to understand the flow of things, you've got to look at several of these things. Then you can start chipping away and say, but look, what's happening here is these Canadians are technically losing this engagement, but the Germans can't replace the vehicles they've lost, whereas the Canadians have replaced theirs. And the Canadians are now learning that the Germans will do a counterattack. And so you can see a progression over the course of the battle by doing it all. But if you stop and do one thing, it either becomes a victory or defeat. And it doesn't tell the story individually. It only tells the story as part of a greater thing. Like I was talking about Operation Epsom earlier. The only way to looking at those operations is looking at them all consecutively. I do it like a one-day tour where I do it geographically, but it goes out of chronological order. So I drive round from some Goodwood I go kind of clockwise round the bottom half of the clock. So I do Goodwood, and I'll do 0.67 the Canadians, Hill 112, and then kind of end up somewhere where Epsom starts. So I'm going backwards, or I could go the other way. But what I do is I kind of explain that here are these various bits of high ground, here are these river valleys, and here's what's happening over 2 months. And then I'll probably finish on the German side of it, on Burgerboos Ridge, and saying, look, here's the view back that way. And over the course of the day, you are able to kind of explain the greater Battle of Caen, but you can't do it in half an hour. You've got to spend some time doing it.
Well, that's the beauty of having the guide, and rather than sort of reading a panel in a museum, because they start to lay out the interpretation of the ground of what is happening. As you say, there's not necessarily always something to see. So I think I was last in Normandy in the late 90s, which quite surprised me when I was thinking about this. And that was just after the 50th anniversary. And museums were getting built or refurbished. And then I talked to Steve from the Green Howards, who is pointing out that, they bought, is it a bush shelter somewhere? And then I was reflecting on the Canadians have built some memorials. I just wondered how much has changed. Have we had a sort of a memory boom that really has invigorated the tourist industry to pump money in, to almost capitalise upon on the landings?
It has. And there's been both a negative and a positive about that, in that the museum has started very much founded by an individual who was really passionate about it, or the local village with all the stuff they found lying around in the fields there that is particularly from that battle there. And then, as I said earlier, the late 90s, 2000s, the sort of Saving Private Ryan, Ambrose peak happened, and the museum has got bigger and better and bolder and more imaginative, and they've had more modern storytelling techniques and things like that, which is good. There are still a couple of the old-fashioned ones. But what's happened, and I've noticed this more recently, is they now feel, because the curator directors are now saying, but we've got to give people everything here, is that half of each museum has now become an introduction to the whole of World War II. So when you went into the museum about Utah Beach, it was just about Utah Beach, pushing up to Cherbourg. The museum on Gold Beach was just about what happened on Gold Beach. And now they're kind of moving into, you go into it and it's like, well, I know who Hitler is. I'm not here. I don't need to. And it's like the seeds of World War II started in the 19th. And it's like, no, take me to the stuff about Gold Beach. But because what they're realizing is people are coming here for less and less time. They will probably select a museum, maybe two. There's about 30 museums here. On my 7-day tour, I only do one. I do one museum in 7 days.
I remember when we went to Bayer and went to Caen when we went in 89, and I can't remember there being any others. There must have been, but...
There must have been, but yeah. So now they're becoming sort of less specific. They're becoming more of an overall... And we've got the new museum is going to be opening for next year, and they're missing the 80th. So it's the one that got badly advertised as D-Day Land, because some French politician kind of implied it was going to be a themed experience, and the press took it to mean like a theme park, and it got christened D-Day Land. And D-Day Land which is not its name, is going to be opening in Colombelles, so just north of Caen, between Caen and the coast. And there'll be like 2,000 people sitting on a a set of seats, and a set of seats move through various halls. And it's going to have reenactors and holograms and stuff like that. And that is going to be a thematic way of explaining. And I'm assuming it's going to not just cover the Battle of Normandy. It's going to cover the seeds of war, occupation, and victory. And some big names are attached to it, like Anthony Beaver and John Killian, who's a French historian. It could be really good, that. It might be awful. I can't predict what it's going to be till I see it. But it's clearly not trying to tell the story of Colombelles and Caen. It's trying to tell a much broader, wider paintbrush version of World War II, which could be a good thing, but it might mean that people that just go and do that and go, well, I've done it now. I've done the museums now. I won't need to go and do Pegasus Bridge or Santa Maria Église, because I've done that big one that has the actors in it. So it could be good, but it's echoing a change of the way people are coming.
If you end up reading a lot of history books, anything published before 1990 doesn't tell you much about the war. They tell you about the event you're reading about. Any modern history book tends to spend a chapter explaining the war, because there's a belief that the reader doesn't actually know about the war anymore.
We have that with our podcasting and YouTube. Is that do you spend too much time doing preamble, or do you just dive straight into? Sometimes you'll lose the viewer or listener because you've gone in beyond their level of knowledge. But you can't start every show reminding people of the list of main characters. So Churchill is the Prime Minister of the UK, and
one would assume if you're going to do D-Day, you'd have some implicit knowledge of what happened before you turned up.
well, you would think so. And yeah, I mean, I was in my mate in Suffolk last week, and I was regaling him some of the stories of the ridiculous questions I've had over the years. But I've had like 8 ridiculous questions in 20 years of being going. I mean, really, truly ridiculous questions. An example, but this wasn't me; it was a friend of mine who took people out for, I think it was a 3-day tour. It might have been a 4-day tour. And he's very, this particular guy, he's very into modern storytelling techniques where there's lots of props and lots of questions and very dynamic, very modern, not like the old tour guide just stand there in a wax jacket with a barber and just say, this happened here, these people went over there. He's very, very interactive. And he gets back into Bayeux and he drops up at the hotel and says, so we've come to the end of our journey together. We've been exploring the beaches. We've paid our respects. We've done this, and I've learned stuff and you've learned stuff. And this, I don't think, is the end of our journey, because you're going to be going off and reading more and learning about this. It's the beginning of another era where we are, he's doing all this stuff. And it's great. And he's going to leave his customers. And one of the people on the tour says, but you haven't finished. And he said, sorry? He said, you haven't finished. We're not all history buffs. You haven't told us who won. My friend left it for a bit, just a few seconds to check it wasn't a joke. That wasn't, no, only kidding. It wasn't a joke. This person needed to know. And my friend said, so what language was the tour conducted in? And they said, English. So we won. But this person didn't know the outcome of World War II after 3 days on the battlefield. That's interesting. I don't expect everyone to join my tour remembering the date of the Battle of Midway or which colonel commanded the so-and-so regiment. That's, but you'd think if you'd booked a D-Day tour, you would have understood the outcome of World War II. Now, you could go into that thing, but did we really win? Because there's communism and there's a Cold War. You could bring up some philosophical idea that World War II wasn't quite the victory. But that's on a different level to not knowing that the Allies were victorious.
I'm going to ask my daughter. My daughter, she's 10 and she's 11. They've just been doing the first and weirdly, they've been doing the First and the Second World War smidged together at school. And I'll have to ask her who won out of naughtiness to see if they've actually been told. And it's a very odd potted history of the war. So they've been doing Colin Gubbins, which I thought was a bit of an odd one to sort of pull out the hat. And then she couldn't remember the other 5 people they had to write about, but she remembered Colin Gubbins for some reason. Do we teach people who won? Is that problem with national remembrance? Now we're all in it together as part of Europe kind of thing. It's an interesting, because there is obviously the problem with how do you deal with the Germans? Are they all evil Nazis as in 1950s and 70s and 60s films? Or are they our friends in the EU? What do you do with the French? The French have a very difficult memory from the war. We flattened Caen, or do they embrace D-Day tourism?
It's complicated. I mean, when people say to me, okay, I'm living in France, what was the French experience? I kind of say, well, you really have to ask a French person or read a French book translated in English, because the experience of each nation of the war is framed through the nation's experience. And Britain, we were never occupied. That's why Britain can have the kind of the street party 40s night kind of railway event thing. That would never happen in France or Norway or Belgium because they were occupied. They not quite literally had a German on every, German headquarters in every village, but that's kind of what was going on. And if you stepped out of line, you were arrested, or you could be arrested, and bombing. So that's interesting. The single question every tour guide gets every single day on a tour in Normandy without fail is, do Germans come to Normandy? I have never done a tour where that question doesn't come up. Everybody gets that question every day. Do Germans come to Normandy?
Is there a German-speaking tour guide in Normandy, operating in Normandy?
There are at least 3 I know who are German-speaking, but they very rarely use German. It'd be very unusual. One of my friends who does it is French, but he was in the French military attached to the Germans, so he's trilingual. And he occasionally takes a German military group. And the answer to the question, by the way, is yes, they do come, Germans, but not in the numbers of Brits or Americans, and in a very much more understated, being careful way, because they have to treat it differently because they were the nation that were the baddies. Now, of course, it's not quite, as you just said there, as black and white as that. My only slight frame of reference, and people say, well, no, it's not really a frame of reference, but it's the only one I've got, is when I, as an Englishman, go to Dublin and Ireland. I would never get off a plane in Dublin with an England football shirt on. It doesn't mean I know I'm going to be welcome in pubs. I know they're going to be nice, but I would not go in there being brazenly English. I would just go in there with a slight sensitivity that there's a range, the Northern Ireland as well, there's a range of views here. Be a bit discreet about it. And that's how the Germans can't come in that overtly, it's you must know with historians, if you're a Brit and you write about the SS, fine, you're a historian. If you're a German writing about the SS, what are you, a Nazi? Are you an SS? Do you believe in the ideology? There's lots more baggage being German in World War II, understandably. So they do come, but they're very discreet. They're not going to stand and have their photos taken in some of the panels and the museums and in the same way Brits and Americans and Americans particularly. We touched on this earlier. The Americans have a very it's a victorious, something to celebrate chapter. I think, weirdly, even the fact that Omaha Beach is perceived as worse than it was is better for the story, in that better to overcome an enemy having been more of a struggle. Like Empire Strikes Back. Return of the Jedi works because Empire Strikes Back, the rebels nearly lost. So I think Americans coming here, the fact that they think Omaha was a much greater struggle than perhaps it was. And when you tell, I see it on people's faces when I tell them how many naval guns are bombarding Omaha Beach and how many Allied aircraft are flying over it and how the Germans just really didn't stand a chance, and that the losses to the first wave, any of the beaches, are always going to happen. That's some poor son of a bitch has to run out of a landing craft first up that beach, and he is likely to be killed or wounded on any of the beaches. But once you've established that foothold, the incredible power the Allies have comes out. People hate it when I say to people that D-Day was about as foregone a conclusion as you could get in war. They said, no, it could have all gone wrong. I go, could it though? The Battle of Normandy can go very badly wrong. Can't lose it, but it can go badly wrong in terms of public opinion and lots of personnel. But in my interpretation, people listening to this might disagree. The Allies have stacked the odds so in our favour on June the 6th that, in terms of mathematics, so many things would have to go wrong for the Allies and right for the Germans that sheer laws of probability says it's not going to happen.
It was just overwhelming firepower, men and material was all just designed to get in there as fast as possible. And it's just phenomenal. Yes,
but Americans particularly seem to need to think there's this outnumbered where it is some, platoon running up a beach. And that is kind of how it is if you're there, but then behind you are these thousands of ships and all these naval guns and everything. So, and then the sheer intelligence we had about it. Again, it comes back to what we were saying earlier about the fact that D-Day wraps up quite neatly at the end. The minute you start tackling on the 7th and 8th of June, it gets complicated.
You actually got me thinking that idea of jeopardy and loss, and whereas D-Day is our D, the British version of D-Day is much more subdued up to a point. I'd wondered if our version of the Omaha Beach is actually the Market Garden. There's more jeopardy. There's more. Do you have to have that jeopardy, loss, potential of loss, or lost disaster kind of thing to actually make the event transcend into the public consciousness, which says a lot. Says a lot for how we consume history, doesn't it?
It does. It does, and it's like using football, which gamers get selected for match of the day. It's the ones that have the moments where it could have gone either way. They very rarely do the 6-0s on there because it just becomes, after a while, it becomes very formulaic. And it's like John Parshall, who wrote Shattered Sword about Midway, and Anthony Tully. They got quite a little bit of flack because people said that their argument is that Midway basically wasn't ever quite as close a run as the movie suggested. Although the Japanese kind of seemed numerically superior, they were spread in various different parts, but people didn't like that. They like to think there's this moment where plucky individual pilots in TBM, Avengers, whatever, are it's all. I mean, there are kind of those moments within that, but on the grand scale, on an operational level, Midway was more likely to go the Allied way, and D-Day kind of falls into that category. So the peril that perhaps people perceive there. But then I feel really bad now because I'm now the guy just sitting in my chair analysing this, going, there was no peril on D-Day. But of course there was peril. If you're there,
If you're running out of that Higgins boat, there's a lot of peril.
it's about having hats again. So I can analytically say, you know what, D-Day, June the 6th, it was unlikely to go wrong. But I would not say that to a guy who was flying over it, approaching it in a landing craft. I would say, you were guaranteed to win. I mean, I just with my partner, we watched The Great Escaper, Michael Caine, and I don't give a flying crap that it wasn't Sword Beach and it wasn't filmed in the right place and it wasn't, in the movie it's the Sherwood Rangers landing on Sword Beach, but I don't care. It was about the emotional connection that guy was having to visiting Normandy for the first time. That's what mattered to that. So that was totally an emotional telling of a story, and the details didn't. I wasn't thinking to go, well, that's wrong. That Sherman's the wrong model. I didn't care. It was.
I'm usually the worst person ever for spotting those. They just wash over me, and then afterwards I'll sit and they'll go, "Oh, but they had the wrong guns. It was the wrong." I'd never noticed. I was just so wrapped up in it all. I forgot to check the gun suppressor on the Sherman was the correct one that was issued in.
The second time I watch a film, I'm worse. But the first time I try and just go into it and look at it as a piece of entertainment, or not necessarily, but a piece of filmmaking, and it went to the Dunkirk argument about whether it is awful or terrible or brilliant, but the whole D-Day thing about the peril and analytical, and again, we're back to this whole idea about what are people coming to see when they come to see it. And some people just want to be told how great the victory was and how brilliant the Allies were. And some people want a bit more of a nuance. They want to understand that sometimes things didn't go the way that the perception is, and there's a level of nuance.
With that in mind, I was going to ask you the question that you've already poo-pooed, but everyone asks me, so I was going to move it on to you, but I'll try and nuance the question, as you've already said it's an impossible question to answer. For people visiting Normandy, if they were self-visiting and looking around, what would your sort of top 3 places to be if they had to sort of tick them off? Because I get emails asking me, and I go, well, you've kind of got to look at Arromanches, and there's there's the gun battery there, and it's good to look on the beaches. And I go, well, when I went years ago, we really enjoyed the Bayeux Museum, but I suspect that that's not the best museum anymore. But if you were pointing somebody to your top 3 places for them to wander around on their own?
I think you're right. I mean, Arromanches is great. The Utah Beach area is fantastic because there's loads of bunkers to crawl in there of various types and sizes and up and down the coast. That's really good. I think the British airborne sector around Pegasus Bridge is really good. It's easy. You can almost cycle it or walk it. You've got Ronville and the Breville and lots of monuments around there to the various battalions that fought there. But my standard response to this is that people visit Normandy, and I did this myself, the wrong way. They go across Normandy, not starting in a place going inland. So Brits get off the ferry in Ouistreham, and they drive along. They drive along Sword Beach, Juno, Gold, end up in Arromanches for lunch or at the end of the day. And Americans do the same thing. They go, but that's not the direction that the Allied armies went. The Allied armies had a landing place and went somewhere. But people don't like doing it the way I suggest, because you're not collecting all the stickers for the sticker album. There's a sense of completion. People want to see the 5 landing beaches, the 2, the American Airborne Zone and the British Airborne Zone, and see that range of places that summarize D-Day to them. But my advice is actually pick one of the sectors. So if you're from Nottingham, pick the Sherwood Rangers, for example. Go to Gold Beach. You can still do Arromanches, do that other way. And then follow the Sherwood Rangers from where they started inland a bit. So go or follow the Americans from Utah Beach towards Cherbourg, or the Americans from Omaha towards Saint-Lô, because you're getting a more complete story. The analogy I use is, if you just go and keep picking D-Day sites, is that you keep starting a new movie trilogy without completing it. You've watched Batman Begins and the first Spider-Man film and Star Wars and et cetera, but you never finish the trilogies off. And to understand what the Battle of Normandy was, is follow that route. So with the Canadians, for example, it's a piece of piss, right? Because there's one army going one direction. So start on Juno Beach, push inland towards Caen, do Caen, Carpiquet Airport, down to Falaise Gap, do that, 2 days, Bob's your uncle, boom, you've done the Canadian story in Normandy. You can see how it started, and you see how it ended, and you're following the same units through, the same command, and you can go, yeah, I kind of understand that. If you just, as I said, go to beaches and do another beach, you're never completing the story, albeit you could go back and read it there. So I would say go armed with a book that covers a unit, Can be anything, 82nd Airborne, Sherwood Rangers, British 3rd Division, whatever it would be, and kind of try and follow that through. And it also, the further you go inland, the more you get to places where the French are really happy for you to be there, because it's not just the tourists going through there. There's a museum in, I forget the name of the village, begins with B, Belle, something. It's down near Aulnay-sur-Odon. It's good. It's one of those museums like they used to be 30 years ago, where it's an association who found all the stuff they found in the, there's doors on display with bullet holes in them and jerry cans and SS abandoned tunics. Berjou, Berjou, I think it is. And there's a Bailey Bridge still over a river, like a mile up the road, which is really cool. And you're going there, and it's in the absolute arse end of nowhere, this place. I mean, you've got the French expression is le trou du cul du monde, which is the hole in the arse of the world. A true hole, cul arse, monde, le trou du cul du monde, the hole in the arse of the world. But the rewards for going there are fantastic, because you're feeling like you're stepping where someone else hasn't just been there on a coach party. Because the Santa Maria Église would get 40 tour buses to it a day. The American Cemetery gets 50, 60 tour buses a day. 2 million people go to the American Cemetery every year. 7 million people come to Normandy every year. But they're doing the same sites. So at the wrong time of year, somewhere like Aramonche, it's just like Trafalgar Square on New Year's Eve. It's so many people. All that. I'm laughing, but people want to have this connection. People are looking for a connection with the past, okay? So if you go onto Google right now and you search Pointe du Hoc, for example, you'll see lovely aerial photos of the craters and the cliffs taken early in the morning when there's nobody there, right? When you turn up today in May or June, you've got to walk through a walkway because you can't go anywhere you want in the site now. It's roped off through a single walkway 10 foot wide, and you might be following 8 tour buses who've just come off a cruise ship. And this isn't hyperbole. You might genuinely be following 8 tour groups, all with the headsets on, with a guy telling them to go through it there. And your hope of having some connection with that ground and standing in a bomb crater and looking up and being awestruck by the firepower the Allies brought to bear on this you can't have that anymore. You can't have that necessarily at Omaha Beach the wrong time of day. But again, there are 24 tour groups all standing there, all telling a variation of the same story, all picking up a bit of sand to take back home. It's like the Taj Mahal. Again, you see photos of the Taj Mahal. I haven't been there, but you go there, it's crowds. So I think if you go inland, you're much more likely to have your personal moment to connect with the past, because you are there with just yourself and the sound of, Hill 112, for example, which is a monumentally important battle that lasted several weeks. I don't think I've ever been there with anybody else. Well, the people in my van with me, sure. But you might just see a bus group there, but you're there and you can walk up the path to where the copse is, and you can look back towards Caen, you can look inland, you can look across, and you can imagine those fields full of Panzer Mark IVs and Bren carriers and the artillery stonks happening from behind, and you can think of the guys pushing their way through the wheat fields. But can you do that if you're standing apart of hundreds of people? That's what the beaches are becoming, as they're becoming more and more popular. You're one of many, many hundreds of people standing there, all trying to have the same moment. If ever I got to go on Wembley, for example, I want to be on there on my own. I wouldn't want to be there. I have been to Wembley for a gig, but you don't. I was at Live Aid, right? No, you don't. You're not standing there thinking, "Oh my God, I'm in the hallowed grounds of." You're just with thousands watching a concert. So I've gone off on a tangent there, but
no, it almost detracts for those moments you've got when you're trying to place yourself. And it's interesting that because when we went with my father, we started at Villers-Bocage, which I'd never heard of as 16, 17, but it meant something to my father's a bloody lorry driver, but he'd gone through Villers-Bocage, presumably going through during the war. He had seen the remnants of, it's Whitman, isn't it, and the tank battle of Villers-Bocage, and that's where our D-Day experience in 89 started, because he had this weird idea that he wanted to go to Villers-Bocage because that had meant something. Very little of much of it meant much to him whatsoever, but that had stuck with him. I'll leave you with this. We went to the museum in Bayeux, and we're walking in, and this French guy hears us speaking English and says to my father, "Oh, you were here during the war?" My dad said, "Yes, I landed in 1944. And she said, "Oh, I was in the RAF." My dad said, "Oh, yes, we're surrounded by bomber bases in Yorkshire. I was based in Yorkshire." My dad just reeled off all the bomber bases in Yorkshire. The guy burst into tears, hugged my father, who just stood there very British with his arms down his side, not quite sure what was happening, very embarrassed. And then the guy staggered off in tears, weeping. It was the most peculiar experience.
Those moments, I had moments like that back in the day, and they were fantastic. And Villa Bocage, by the way, just to kind of bookend on what you said there, is that there's a place that's really interesting on multiple levels, because you can stand there now. There's almost no remnants of the battle now, because it was wiped out in the weeks that followed. There's almost no original buildings, but you can still match up where some of the tanks and the Cromwells and certain things were. There are a couple of railings of bullet holes in one particular house there. But what is also interesting is you can see the rebuilding. You can see Villa Bocage as part of a series of events. You know, there was this incredible action that wasn't quite as a turning point as some of the historians have said on June the 13th, where Wittmann came down, blah, 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 knocking out tanks. And you got to point 103 just out of it. But you can also see France rebuilt, because Villa Bocage is kind of a thriving town now, but it's not authentic, but it's nice. Got nice shops in Villa Bocage. I drive through it a lot on my way to see family and what have you. And so there's a lot you can take on there, but you've got to go there with the right attitude. What is it I'm looking to see here? Because if you're looking to see World War II relics, you're not going to see much in Villa Bocage. There's other places that are far more full of that kind of stuff. But as a learning experience, I think Villa Bocage can be really quite interesting. You can see that, so this town has been rebuilt, but look how it's doing well now. Look how World War II is remembered here. Look at the monuments. Look at they name the streets after Allied commanders, this, that, and the other. And you can see Aunay-sur-Odon is another similar place where you go in the restored church there. They have like 6 foot by 4 foot aerial photos of the damage to that town in World War II there. And you can just see it. Here was a town that was pretty much wiped off the face of the earth. And now here it is thriving. That's a lesson of where historiography, as well as just the events of the war, is where we are now. How is this town viewing their past there? They're embracing it. I mean, there's a couple of examples and I'll let you go there there's 2 churches opposite the N13 highway, so the road between Bayeux and Caen. So Norry-en-Bessin is on the south and Bretteville-Lauriers is to the north. And the story is, and I don't know how true it is, but bear with me, is that after war, the 2 towns are part of one commune. They could repair one church tower, but not the other. So the other one just goes up and stops. So we can only afford to do one. The one on the top that has been restored looks like any other church in Normandy. The one on the south didn't have it just goes up and stops. It almost looks like a water tower. Now, people in that village are much more proud of it now, because they wear it as like a purple heart. They say, here's our church that never got repaired because we've still got our damage. Bretteville-Lauriers, north of the town, felt at the time they won the lottery because they got their church tower repaired. But the town south that didn't feel that long term they have won the battle because they've got this scar of war. It's like how some people proudly wear their scars of their cancer survival. It's this is my badge. Others hide it. Others, that's part of. So that to me is a really interesting symbol of how the French are moving through their way of looking at it. Something that was negative now becoming positive. There's a bullet hole in a glass effigy in Sainte-Marie-de-Mont, so behind Utah Beach, and it's of the French Saint Therese of Lisieux. There's a basilica built in Lisieux to Saint Therese. And there's a bullet hole in there that was caused on June the 6th by it's American or German, it's whatever. Now they've had to block up the hole with a bit of perspex behind it, but for years people would use this bullet hole in the village to roll up prayers on bits of paper about the ill member of their family and post it through the bullet hole to Saint Therese, who was known as a nurse, so she could help them with their mother's arthritis, right? But I love the idea of a bullet hole of someone trying to kill a human being, trying to kill another human being with a gun, has become a portal for offering a prayer in honor of your family. That's historiography and moving with the times encapsulated. That's why I love living here. And now they couldn't, because one year someone put a lit match through some idiot around June, and the prayers went all up. And and that happened around June the 5th. So that whole thing I talked about, the weird thing about the anniversary is all these extra people mean extra idiots too. So an idiot, for whatever reason, decided to put a lit match through this bullet hole. So now they've got covered purple. Now you can you have to put the prayers in a like a money box thing on the side. But isn't that a cool story though, of how you're turning something from a tragedy to like a message of hope.
It is a very cool story, yes. Well, look, Paul, thank you for your time. That was brilliant. Loyal listener, you can find Paul at WW2TV, World War II TV, on YouTube, where he chats with some of the world's best military historians. And his website is D-Day Historian, or one word, no hyphen, ddayhistorian.com. So that is all for this episode. I'm Angus Wallace, and thanks for listening.
Jerry 88mm gun hit our tank, blew us the hell out of it.
Stalingrad can never be repaired.
As Allied Commander-in-Chief, I have granted a military armistice.